Welcome back to a new episode of Future Bytes on the Hackensack Media stage in Penn Plaza, New York City. You can hear this podcast on the OG Podcast Network, iTunes, Google Play. Look for us. We're up there in the cloud. You can download us and stream us. Today, we are talking about a subject that I am actually very interested in, which is blockchain. With me, I have a dear friend, Gordon Meyer, who's the VP of Marketing for Lampix, which is an AR coming soon to you solution for your lifestyle, and to me,
augmented reality.
Augmented reality
for everyone.
So I would like to give like just a short little love to Gordon. Gordon is one of the people that I met very, very early in my discovery of technology in the kitchen. I would call it extreme technology because to me a microwave is already a piece of technology that we have in the kitchen. But as I expanded my career and worked in TV for the past few years, I have found something that is interesting to me as much as my ancient heritage. So I'm trying to use now these days technology to keep alive those stories, given that eventually those stories will become really, really old. And new technology, I think, is going to help. And that we'll go back to this when we'll start talking about blockchain. So, Gordon, a little bit about yourself and give us a description of blockchain, what it is, how it's used right now, and then we'll get to the kitchen component of it.
Well, first of all, I think it's kind of cool that you and I actually first met when I moved into your neighborhood, to your block, right as my wife was pregnant with our now first child. And at the time, I was actually working in radio. At the time, I was actually in Sirius XM. So it's kind of neat now, coming back here
with a microphone again.
Here with a microphone, back to radio. But we got to talking, and you had the shop, and over coffee or whatever, we would start to talk about a mutual interest in technology. And my career has always led to being a part of different disruptive technologies, whether that was even streaming radio back in like 2005, when all my friends were like, "You moron! Who's going to pay for radio? Who's going to pay to listen to content?" And of course, now that's
the only way.
That's the only way, right? And so, through virtual reality, and we worked together on a virtual reality project, and now in augmented reality. So, I work at a company called Lampix. We're an augmented reality tabletop projection system that can see and understand the objects and documents and hands around it. So, and then project information, augmented reality around that. And in order to enable our tabletop computer to understand the world around it, we're feeding the system all kinds of example images of these objects and labeling them. And in order to do that, we're building that on the blockchain, because we want to crowdsource all of this information. So we created the PIX token. And
let's give it, before we talk about the token, let's give give me like the simplest definition of blockchain.
So to lead in, why would we do that? Like, why would we, we could crowdsource information and, write a bunch of checks to all these people. And that's the way business has been done up until, fairly recently, that, you would get an army of accountants and you would, pay these people for their work. So that gets into blockchain, right? So I think what a lot of people know are predominantly three words. There's blockchain, there's Bitcoin, and there's Ethereum. So, blockchain was an amazing concept that was put forth by a mysterious individual who created this technology, and it was Bitcoin led the way, and Bitcoin is a coin based on this blockchain concept. And this mysterious individual came out with a white paper and came out with the technology behind this, and it was really a reaction to the collapse of the economy in America over the banking system and the mortgage crisis. And it was a reaction to the fact that a lot of data was being held by few people in centralized located places, and they were able to play a little bit of a shell game and hide.
Yeah.
And so they
or
could
manipulate.
and
when
they
it was
could and
necessary.
manipulate, right? They were collecting all of the power, and so there were people who knew full well, for instance, that somebody couldn't pay, their mortgage or whatever, and they were, tying them to these ballooned payments that they had no hope of ever paying in exchange for a quick buck. So the idea of blockchain is a new idea. So we have this traditional system of contracts and a ledger. So if I was to sell something to you, I might balance my checkbook. Let's say I sell a car to you, right? I would say, all right, I sold a car to Gabriele, and I sold it for however much money. And then you in your accounting would say, I bought a car from Gordon, and I bought it for this much money. And so I would have a record, and you would have a record. And that's the way things have gone as far as powering business since the days of Mesopotamia, when they invented this ledger system.
Invoice and receipt.
And not only that, but the new idea thousands of years ago was I would keep a record and you would keep a record, and I would keep a record of the loss, not just the things that I buy, but the things that I'm selling and giving away. So there's a problem with that because errors can be made, right? And I have my accounting of what happened, and you have your accounting of what happened, but maybe I'm wrong. And it gets into I say, you say,
or maybe my ledger gets damaged or lost in a fire or in a flood or something, like the piece of information can be
or maybe
altered.
the bank cooks the books, right?
Exactly.
Maybe the person holding all of these ledgers is changing things. So the big idea behind blockchain was, well, these things can be hacked, these things can be edited by unsavory parties. What if we take the entire ledger, the entire book, and we copy it? Let's kind of think a little bit like the internet and have full copies of all of them on what are called nodes. So there are computers all over the world now that have an exact copy, a replica of this ledger. Well, that's an interesting advancement, because that means if I hack one of them, the rest of the nodes
there's still redundancy.
Say, wait a minute, there's an error. So whenever there's a transaction on the blockchain, the transaction happens, maybe with the nearest node, but the node then checks with all the other nodes
to make sure that the information is
so
correct.
If I say I own a token number 001, for an easy example, and it's mine, and I give it to you, and the other nodes say, wait a minute, that token 001 was not Gordon's. But maybe one node says yes, but the rest of the nodes say no. Well, that one node has bad data. Maybe somebody hacked it. And so there's an automatic system, a check and balance, to make sure that nobody is altering any data. So there's security.
So yeah, in essence, blockchain has been built to absorb information or contain and deliver information without the possibility of trying to reduce the possibility of hacking, manipulation, and all that.
Right. And so to facilitate that, a lot of computing power has to happen, because each individual transaction needs to be double checked on all these nodes.
Yeah.
And that can take some time. So with blockchain, with Bitcoin specifically, now that can take 10, 20 minutes. Not
for a transaction to be verified and
double
happen.
Checked, right?
Okay.
And so that's an area that Bitcoin, in order to be, let's say, the credit, the future currency that the entire globe, the entire universe, aliens and everybody else are using, it needs to be faster than that.
It might be worth if you're buying a house, waiting for half hour for the payment to clear, but not if you're going to buy coffee.
But the huge benefit is there's no middleman. This is a distributed network. And people are being paid in Bitcoin to host one of these nodes. They're incented to do it. But there is no one central person who's in charge of this thing. It's functioning as a collective. And because everyone has the full copy, it is hyper transparent. And I can hide behind a number. And so everybody knows the numbers, and it says, okay, there's a token, there's a Bitcoin, it was transferred from one wallet to another wallet, but it doesn't know who was behind each wallet, unless we want to disclose ourselves. And so everybody involved has the power over their own identity. They can disclose it or not. And even if they do, if you have lots of different tokens, nobody can go and they can go after your one Bitcoin, but it's really difficult to go after your entire wallet. More so, for any thief, you can rob one individual, or you can try and rob everybody, but it's impossible to rob everybody. There's no central bank that we can break into and grab the millions and millions or billions of dollars.
Just data.
So that's that's Bitcoin. One analogy I would give with Bitcoin is, imagine, if you will, way back when we went to grade school, and you would go into the school library, you would have a card catalog, and the card catalog would say, there's a book, and it's called, you know, here's the author's name, and here's the name of the book, and here's where you can find it. And it used to be when you go to the book and you open up the inside cover, it would have
the names of the people that had it before,
right?
Yeah.
And when, right? So imagine if you took that piece of paper and you combined it with the card catalog, and you had one document that says, there's a book, that here's the name of the book, here's the author, and here's everyone who's ever had it.
Yeah.
That is a pretty good analogy, I find, with Bitcoin, because the coin itself knows everyone who's ever owned it back from the day it was born.
It's almost like signing your $1 and seeing how many, you know.
Yeah. And there were societies actually doing that. You know, there were islands in the Pacific where the currency was actually a stone, and the stone would be so big you wouldn't move it. So your money was this.
Which just an asset.
Let's go. This stone. But everyone would memorize who owns the stone, and the entire island knew, you know, hey,
whose stone was that?
The middle-sized one is Gordon's, and the much bigger one is Gabriele's. But everyone would also memorize who had it before them. So they memorized sort of like the family tree of this currency. And if I wanted to buy a house, let's say, you know, and I wanted to buy your house, I would say, well, Gabriele, you can have my stone, and the entire community would all understand that Gabriele now owns 2 stones, and it used to be Gordon's, and now it's Gabriele's. And that is another similar idea to how Bitcoin works. Bitcoin understands all of its transactions, and with multiple copies of all of that, there's very little way for anyone to say, you got my Bitcoin. Right.
Well, to me, and you know, this to me is incredibly interesting, and I hope that, you know, people can understand the way that the blockchain works. And it took me a little bit to, if anything, to elaborate a different way of conceptualizing the way that it works, because to me, it almost you know, the blockchain almost allows you to contain data, transport data, preserve information. I have built my career on leveraging the heritage of land, on, you know, turn of the century kind of stuff, the farmers. So the late 1800s, the early 1900s, and then my great-great-grandfather, and then my grandfather, and then my father, and now me. My kids are living in the US and not living in Italy. They live in a digital world that is very different from the analog environment where I grew up. It is becoming hard to convey a certain kind of information about the past to a generation that mostly understands what's happening now and have an eye truly towards the future in a very American way, in a very Western way, where we are well-grounded because of a good heritage in a way or in another. But at the same time, we want to be productive and want to build and look forward. So on one side, I see blockchain as the opportunity to build a genealogy trees, to carry on information from one family to the next and preserve history in a way that, and that's another thing, history cannot be rewritten. There are certain things that should not be debated, like the Holocaust. Like you cannot go state to state or, you know, nation to nation and realize that storybooks are somewhat different. It is normal for a country to give predominant importance to their own history. Like my daughter already has studied the American Revolution for like so many times and still has not done, you know, the Egyptians, but it's fine. Eventually it will come. So when I think about the kitchen, and, you know, now 15 minutes in the conversation, we are finally in the kitchen, I start thinking, for the most part, about the use that the blockchain can be, the way that it can be applied to the ingredients and to the things that I do source. How everything that arrives in my house, being an animal, being a plant, being any kind of product, and I think it's probably in an attempt to generate transparency and accountability. Do you think that these kind of systems could be applied? Do you see blockchain being elastic enough to helping other industries rather than just currency and markets?
Absolutely. So one of the newer advances is Ethereum, and people may have heard about Ethereum. It's different than Bitcoin. It's still using blockchain, but Ethereum allows for smart contracts. So instead of just it being a ledger and functioning purely as a currency and the digital coin itself is the thing. Ethereum comes along, and it's a contract where you can have additional information. So you can pack in, let's say, my social media profile can exist on Ethereum. And the exchange of that information, and I can unlock it. I can give you the keys so that you have access, or I can not, and I have control over that information. And so Ethereum is sort of like a supercomputer where all of this information can be uploaded to the supercomputer. It's leveraging blockchain, so it's irrefutable and exceptionally difficult to hack. And then there is Ether, which is the actual token, and that's used as an exchange, and it's kind of considered like gas to help pay for the computational power to process this information, to unlock this information, and I can then create tokens on top of this to facilitate an exchange. So maybe that's a exchange of contracts, and perhaps there's money to exchange for the contract, and other information can be packed in there. So the PIX token is using the Ethereum technology. It's what's called an ERC-20 compliant token, and we're attaching, images for computer recognition tied on Ethereum to an individual. And if somebody wants to buy access to that image, they pay the individual who took the photo. So let's think about food and how that relates. So there's a number of projects going on right now to address a number of crises going on in the world, mainly about starvation, hunger, food production. Nearly $1 trillion worth of food every year gets wasted, negated. There is enough food grown in Africa to feed every American for a year, certainly to feed themselves, but 50% of the food grown in Africa gets wasted and spoiled. It either gets lost, right, which is theft, graft, corruption, or it gets spoiled, which is just bad management, right? And knowing that, I think in America we tend to think of farming as big business. The image you might even have in your head is of a majorly, massive tractor on
this,
miles and miles of land. If
the
I
big
have,
open American sky.
Right, I got thousands of head of cattle. But the fact of the matter is, there's over 500 million farmers in the world, and a lot of the farmers are poor, and you're doing what you have access to, which is your land, and growing crops on your land. Now, if you're in a third world country and you happen to be a farmer, perhaps you're keeping records, maybe. And if you're keeping records, there's a good chance that you're doing it on paper. Right. And the one thing you certainly don't have access to is a lot of data about what these things should cost. So if I'm growing sorghum, which is a grain used typically to feed cattle, right? And it's worth money to people who have lots of cattle, but maybe I'm growing sorghum in an area that doesn't have a lot of cattle, right? And I want to sell a bushel of this. How much should it cost? Right? Now, maybe that's up to the negotiating power of the patriarch of the family or the farmer. What happens if the patriarch passes away and now the matriarch needs to negotiate? What if this is in a patriarchal society and a woman can't negotiate as well as a man? What if these farmers don't have access to what the price is in the neighboring town or city or area where sorghum is worth more?
The first thing would be to connect them.
Right.
Obviously.
So this can all happen on the blockchain. This can all happen via Ethereum. And there are another number of projects involved to get, even to pay for cell phones into the hands of farmers, because merely with a smartphone, you're able to access blockchain technology, access a network or a token to facilitate the exchange, but also the information and the power that comes along with it to know what this stuff is worth, what people are willing to buy it for.
Do you think that that the blockchain is doing to, I don't even know how to call the industry, let's call it communication, because to me it carries a story, it carries information. So to me, blockchain in my head is almost like a communication device. But would you say that is going to become the standard, or is going to happen what has happened, let's say, with the MP3 files that completely revolutionized the way that music was digitalized and carried around? But then you have other different codecs that came afterwards, the MP4, the AIF, and people started moving different formats. The music stays the same. It's just a format that change. Do you see that blockchain is going to become the standard, or there are other technologies that are trying to imitate or emulate or create this same spread ledger availability for information to be preserved?
At the end of the day, the blockchain concept will prevail.
Okay.
There are different ways to leverage that may be faster, use less computational power, less energy. Right. One of the problems right now with Bitcoin is that it costs a lot of electricity to keep this stuff going, and people question whether or not that will have sustainability over time if everyone is on that system. So the system needs to solve some of these core problems. There are some newer concepts to address those issues. I look at it, I guess, the analogy of there was the .com boom and then there was a bust, right? And the prime example people used back in, I think it was the late 90s, was like Pets.com, which ascended. They had a sock puppet. They had millions of dollars of commercials on the Super Bowl, and the company folded, right? There was consolidation. But the idea of getting your pet food delivered to you, it never went away, right? The internet was still solving a core problem that people had, is that dog food can be heavy, and I don't want to go to the store every time my dog is hungry, and let me just put it on auto ship and forget about it, right? So the same thing with blockchain. There's right now, we're on a slight downturn of the market, but the concept and the ideas are all there, and ultimately very, very useful. And a lot of people have faith, as do I, that the core technology behind all of this is supremely important and will not go away. This is like, it'd be like saying like, oh, the internet took a downturn, and maybe no one's going to use the internet anymore. It's a fad. This is not a fad.
Well, what fascinates me is that, on one end, I have somebody like you that is working in AR and using blockchain to help the machine grow, because ultimately you're leveraging blockchain and the PIX token that you're issued to build the knowledge within your machine, right? Is that, would you say that that's a proper?
It's obviously a very good idea if when I buy food, even at a restaurant, that I know its history. I know where it came from irrefutably, and I can get it down to the farm, even get down to what the farm's methods were.
I mean, in my head, the moment that the calf is born, it can be recorded and added to the blockchain. You're going to know when it's going to be vaccinated, when he got sick, when he got moved from farm to farm, how long he was held in one place, when he was butchered, and so on and so forth. And the same goes for basically everything. I try to bring the conversation always to the kitchen, but, talk about a wine. The grape. What was the weather condition where this wine was made and the grapes? Was it a good year or a bad year? And those are things that people that understand wine are aware. You have a Brunello di Montalcino. Not every year is the same. Every year it changes. They might have had a hotter summer. They might have that week of rain in the wrong moment of the season, or it could have been a perfect year. And this, to me, is almost like writing a diary. The only thing is that we need to keep hoping that the people entering this kind of information are entering it in an accurate way.
That's right. So, when Bitcoin was introduced, it's ultimately secure, mainly because the coin is the coin is the coin. There's no other asset outside of this system that it's pointing to. And I guess going back to the example in the library, if I pull out a card and it says, well, there's a book, and the book is, the Dewey Decimal System, the number is here, you can find it over on that aisle. I could go there and the book might not be there, right? Somebody might have stolen the book, and the card catalog doesn't know whether or not the book was stolen, right? It says it's over there, but maybe it's not over there. And anytime you introduce something outside of digital and it touches on physical, and this digital asset is referring to some physical thing, there's an opportunity for some kind of a failure. So maybe I'm Rifty tagging the ear of the cattle, and that's tied to a number that's ultimately tied to blockchain. Can that stop somebody from switching the tags?
Is blockchain a file? Like to kind of like give it a sense, give it a shape. Blockchain is just a file?
That's right.
So in theory, you could carry in a chip.
Yes. Yes, and that might be the individual number of the file, and obviously this is going to be kept on a node and all the other nodes. And, think of the file, too, as being able to be zipped up, right? So you can have a large file, but you can shrink it down. And that's where you get into the idea of the block. That's why there's a blockchain. All these different blocks have lots of different transactions that have occurred, and they've compressed that data and formed it into a block.
Are they linear? this transaction, or they do have branches as well? Like if you see a blockchain being born, let's say, again, I'm planting the seed, okay? And this is my first piece of the blockchain. First of all, is it going to be a block added to a pre-existing chain, or chains are being created constantly for the sake of building the information around a certain item? Or
well, you get you have branches, but you also you're kind of introducing the concept of a fork. And so Bitcoin experienced this when they debated about the methodology of it and how to compress all of the data, and they were looking at improving the speed of the accounting, and they came up with Bitcoin Cash. So we had a hard fork, and a new coin was created that uses the new system. So now you have Bitcoin Cash, and you have Bitcoin, regular Bitcoin, and same with Ethereum. And so there's like Ethereum Classic, and you have these hard forks where people come up with new ideas. But if you're adhering to a particular blockchain, yeah, you're adding a new block to the chain, and it's continuously getting longer and needs more computational power, etc. So yeah, and getting back to then heritage and how do we encapsulate all these things? Yeah, think about just like history. Typically, in war, the victor gets to write the story.
Right.
What happens now with blockchain where we can capture the story as it's happening, perhaps, and create truth, create irrefutable truth that nobody else can subvert? And that's why a lot of people are looking to blockchain as the ultimate truth machine, because there's copies everywhere, and no one country bounded by borders can control this information. It becomes global, and no one's in control of it. So your story becomes permanent, and your story the way you tell it, right? And as a farmer, if I'm involved in food production, I get to have the power and the say, and that means then the middleman maybe is out of their job.
Maybe is out of their job.
Maybe is out of a job, and I think that's probably a very good thing. Because maybe the 50% or 1/3 of the world's food is going to waste. Maybe we can find a way to use
it's also, I think it's a matter also of representation. The middleman always has to represent a good to a buyer. In my industry, the middleman is the agent or the manager that represent the talent to the possible employer. One of the things that I realized, because I am also an entrepreneur, is that I do not like middlemen, because I don't like anybody speaking on my behalf. If you need to know something from me, I'm here. Ask me. And it doesn't matter if it's a job interview. It doesn't matter if I need to be introduced to somebody. But that happens, I think, in every field, everybody. There's nobody that can, tell who you are better than yourself. Maybe your mother. Okay, so maybe you can call my mom. Right. But that's the way of blockchain. Right. Like, I'm seriously connected to my mom. That was the first link. I am the second link, and that's the same with my kids. So, we have about a couple of minutes. I would like to hear from you. Where is there any other application, or is what are you hopeful for the future of blockchain? Where do you see things that are incredibly exciting to you, but also possible pitfalls if there's anything that worries you?
Well, one aspect of blockchain that's really exciting is crowdsourcing and being able to pay people micropayments for their work. So currently, there's debate on Facebook, right, where the people are the product, right, and you're giving away your information for free, and the users of Facebook aren't being paid. Blockchain could solve that. Maybe you can get paid via a token for clicking on ads, let's say. For us, with the Pix token, we're crowdsourcing image capture for computer recognition and enabling anyone, anywhere, at home, in the fields, wherever they may be, to get paid for their work in a way that doesn't require an army of lawyers, accountants, etc., and licking a stamp and putting a check in the mail. We can handle these transactions on the Ethereum network within 10 seconds. So what does that mean? That means the future of work is going to be different. What you get paid for can be different. I mean, there are tokens out there that would pay you to walk.
Well, look,
right? What if your sneaker pays you to use your sneaker, right?
Right.
You're advertising. You're advertising their logo everywhere. Maybe you should get paid for that. So we get to rethink what these transactions are. And when you get into microtransactions that weren't always feasible before, and maybe I didn't care about a penny when it was an actual hard currency, fiat penny. But those do add up, and if I can put them all into a wallet and take out $100, well, that's meaningful. Maybe that's groceries on the table.
Yep.
So I'm excited about that. Where is there a pitfall? I think that there's the major pitfall is that what happens to blockchain is what happened to the internet. The internet initially was a distributed system. It was totally decentralized, and somehow it became centralized. Right?
Big servers,
somehow
big
it's
companies.
Google
Yep.
and Amazon and Facebook. It's like 5 entities effectively control the vast majority of the internet traffic. And what was
I do
supposed to
see
be
it very possible for 4 or 5 currencies becoming the top currencies, globally. This also kind of like solves the issue. This coin is global. This is not, by being decentralized, the value is what I'm paying you a transaction on the web in Japan or in Asia or in Italy. That is that would be the cost. As we're closing, I want to ask a little bit of Lampics, just because me and you have been toying. I mean, it's your job. You work for Lampics, but it's one of those products that I'm dying to get into my kitchen. I've been playing with it at South by Southwest. I still follow, what you guys are doing. Where are you at? When are you going to be able? I noticed that you pushed the developer kit out. So you have you have machines that are available for people to buy and start working and developing apps for them. What's going on and what we can hope for?
So, Lampics is tabletop augmented reality hardware and software. We have a platform and we have a projector in the form factor of a lamp. It looks like a desk lamp. You put it on your desk and it projects downward onto the surface of your desk or table and creates an augmented reality surface where I can put objects down, I can use my hand and click on menus, all projected augmented reality, buttons, what have you. I could play games. I could play Scrabble, and Lampics can score my game. I can play Monopoly, and Lampics can, celebrate with audio and visuals when I, let's say, pass go on the actual Monopoly game board.
The hospitality industry, as a start,
Lampics
can benefit in an incredible way from it.
The ingredients. You could throw in a couple ingredients down, and it could say, "Hey, here's some recommended recipes
for,
or maybe some liquor bottles.
A bottle of wine. Would you like to know more about it?
Here's a cocktail you can make. I got these 3 ingredients. What can I make? So there's a lot of applications here. We're very, very excited. We are going to manufacture with our new updated hardware design in November.
Oh, congrats.
So in November, we will be shipping to our developers who can purchase the developer kit online on our website. And then we make it very easy for them to build augmented reality apps on our platform that leverage objects, and which could be game pieces, could be anything. So as of November, this will be live and in people's hands. We have prototypes that we've been working with clients who are very excited about it. Yeah, and so a lot of major businesses, retail businesses, are looking at this solution because the primary benefit here is I don't need glasses. I don't need an app. I don't have to do anything.
It's
there. It's projected on a tabletop, and I can walk up to it and immediately engage. And in a retail environment, then that means I could.
That's fantastic.
I don't need to download the Nike app or have this Apple's glasses or whoever else's glasses.
Well, think about Terminal 4 at JFK with all those iPads,
and no one uses them.
And no one uses
them.
You
it's
can
a
free up
graveyard.
and engage better with the people across from you.
Yeah, and we really think that the future isn't, right now it's been an explosion of screens, and then everyone has monitors, and we've got smaller monitors we put in our pockets with our phones, and at the end of the day, all of the information contained in all of these little boxes wants to spread out into the world around us. And we want to augment our lives, not augment a tiny little box that we have to, that's not very friendly to the human physiology.
Yeah, it's almost like, we have built the cloud, and now let's figure out how the cloud can express itself without too many interruption or too many screens or devices between you.
We've been working and conforming to the computers, and we've got our mice and our keyboards. We get carpal tunnel syndrome. The future of computing is that the computer works with us, the way we work. And they need to observe us, be proactive, and offer helpful suggestions based on the way we live, the way we want to work.
Thank you very much, computers. I think that this is the perfect ending. Yes, that
Yeah.
that is truly that. They
That's
have
the
to
future,
adapt
right?
to us.
We're here talking future
That's
bytes. The future is
Gordon Meyer, VP of Marketing at Lampics. Thank you so much for your time. Best of luck with your device. And, you know, I have definitely learned more about blockchain and my ideas are clearer. Hopefully you at home or on the radio know a little bit more about it as well. From the OG Podcast Network and Feeder Bytes, thank you very much. And we'll get you next week on stage 17 and the Hackensack Meridian in Penn Plaza, New York City. Bye-bye.